A humble single mother had spent years building a quiet, stable life for her daughter, keeping the past buried where it couldn't hurt them. But everything unraveled the moment her 5-year-old walked into the CEO's office, looked up at the powerful, unsuspecting man behind the desk, and asked with innocent curiosity. "Excuse me, mister, are you my daddy?" The room fell silent. The man's piercing blue eyes locked onto the little girl, then slowly lifted to her mother's face. And in that instant, Emily Carter knew there was no escaping the truth anymore. Emily Carter hurried down the busy sidewalk, gripping her 5-year-old daughter Sophia's hand tightly as they weaved through the morning crowd. The city was already alive with people rushing to work, the sound of honking cars blending with the murmur of hurried conversations. Emily barely noticed. Her focus was on getting to the office on time while keeping Sophia close. This wasn't how she had planned her morning. Normally, Sophia would be at the daycare with her usual routine, story time, nap time, and playing with the other children. But today, everything had fallen apart. Her babysitter had cancelled at the last minute, and Emily had no family in the city to call for help. Missing a shift wasn't an option. Her paycheck barely covered their rent as it was, and she couldn't afford to risk losing this job. She glanced down at Sophia, who was looking up at the towering office buildings with wide blue eyes. The little girl's dark curls bounced with every step, her small fingers clutching Emily's sleeve. "Mommy, is this where you work?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "Yes, sweetheart," Emily said, forcing a smile. "But you have to be very quiet, okay? You can sit in the break room and color while I finish my work." Sophia nodded eagerly, as if this was an exciting adventure rather than an emergency solution. Emily wished she could see things the way her daughter did, with wide-eyed wonder instead of constant worry. When they arrived at the office building, Emily led Sophia through the employee entrance, avoiding the front lobby where executives and high-level staff walked through. She kept her head down, walking quickly, hoping not to run into anyone important. She knew the rules. Bringing a child to work was frowned upon, but she had no choice. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee and paper filled the air, and the quiet hum of employees typing on their keyboards created the usual background noise. The contrast between this sleek corporate world and the chaos of Emily's personal life was stark. She guided Sophia to the small break room near the janitor's closet, setting her up with a coloring book and a small stuffed bear. "Stay here, okay? I'll be close by," Emily whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Sophia nodded, already opening the coloring book. Emily hesitated for a moment, her heart aching at the sight of her daughter sitting alone in a room that wasn't meant for her. But she had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped out into the main hallway and grabbed her cleaning supplies. She moved quickly, wiping down desks, emptying trash cans, and straightening chairs. She had done this job for years, learning how to be invisible, how to work efficiently without drawing attention. But today, she would fail at that. Because today, Sophia wasn't going to stay where she was supposed to. And in just a few minutes, Emily's life would change forever. Sophia sat in the break room, her small hands carefully coloring inside the lines of a princess drawing. For the first few minutes, she had been content, humming softly to herself as she focused on filling in the dress with a bright shade of blue. But as time passed, the room grew quieter, and the excitement of being in a new place started to fade. She glanced at the door, her curiosity growing. She had never been to her mother's work before. She had imagined a place filled with stacks of papers, ringing phones, and people in fancy clothes rushing around. From what little she had seen when they walked in, her imagination had been mostly right. But now, sitting alone in this small, empty room, she felt the urge to explore. Peeking her head out into the hallway, she saw no one nearby. Mommy had said to stay put, but Sophia wasn't planning to go far. She just wanted to see a little more before going back to her coloring book. Slipping off the chair, she quietly stepped into the hallway. The carpet was soft under her shoes, and the walls were lined with doors leading to offices, some of them open just enough for her to glimpse desks, computer screens, and big chairs. Everything looked fancy, much different from their small apartment. Sophia walked slowly, careful not to make too much noise. The people here all seemed very serious, dressed in nice clothes, talking to each other with important expressions. No one noticed her. Then, something caught her eye, a large office at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly open, and from her angle, she could see a man sitting behind a big wooden desk. His head was bent over a stack of papers, his golden hair catching the light from the window. Sophia tilted her head. He looked familiar, though she wasn't sure why. Without really thinking, she pushed the door open just a little more and took a step inside. The man didn't notice at first, too focused on whatever he was reading. His suit was dark, his tie neatly in place, and everything about him seemed important. Sophia hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Excuse me, mister, are you my daddy?" The words left her mouth so naturally that she didn't even question them. But the moment they reached the man's ears, he froze. His pen stopped moving, his entire body going rigid. Slowly, he lifted his head, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, his brow furrowed. "What did you just say?" Sophia took another step forward, her dark curls bouncing as she looked up at him. "You look like my daddy," she said, studying his face. Henry Bennett was not a man who was easily caught off guard. He had built a career on confidence, on control, on always being the most prepared person in the room. But in that moment, faced with a little girl who had just called him her father, he found himself speechless. Before he could process what was happening, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the hallway. "Sophia." Emily's voice rang out, breathless and panicked. Henry turned just in time to see a woman rush through the door, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her blue eyes filled with worry. She grabbed the little girl's hand and pulled her close. "I told you to stay in the break room," Emily whispered, her voice tight. Then, as if realizing where they were, she looked up, straight into Henry's stunned expression. Their eyes met, and everything else seemed to fall away. Henry's voice was low, controlled, but laced with something sharp. "Emily." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. She had prayed this moment would never come. But now, standing face to face with the man she had spent years avoiding, she knew there was no escape. He knew. And there was no going back. Emily felt her entire body go numb as she stood frozen in Henry Bennett's office. The weight of his gaze pinned her in place, a mix of shock, confusion, and something unreadable flickering in his piercing blue eyes. She had spent years preparing for the possibility of this moment, imagining what she would say if they ever crossed paths again. But now that it was happening, all the words she had rehearsed disappeared. Henry slowly pushed his chair back, his movements deliberate, as if trying to make sense of the situation. His eyes flickered from Emily to Sophia, who was gripping her mother's hand but still looking up at him with innocent curiosity. He had spent his entire career navigating high-stakes negotiations, dealing with billion-dollar contracts, handling crises with a level head. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the moment when a 5-year-old girl he had never met looked him in the eye and asked if he was her father. "Emily," he said, his voice quieter now, but there was no mistaking the tension underneath. "Tell me what's going on." Emily's fingers instinctively tightened around Sophia's small hand, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She knew she had to say something, but she also knew that no matter what she said, there was no undoing this moment. There was no way to stop the past from catching up to her now. "It's not what you think," she finally managed, though even she wasn't sure what that meant. Henry's jaw clenched slightly, his blue eyes narrowing. "Not what I think." He exhaled slowly, clearly trying to keep himself composed. "A child walks into my office and calls me her father. That's not exactly something I can misinterpret, Emily." Sophia looked between them, sensing the tension even though she didn't fully understand it. "Mommy," she asked softly, tilting her head. "Did I do something wrong?" Emily felt her heart squeeze at the sound of her daughter's voice. She crouched down, brushing a curl behind Sophia's ear, forcing herself to smile even though her entire body felt like it was unraveling. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." Henry watched the exchange, and something in his face shifted. His gaze softened just slightly, but his confusion remained. He turned back to Emily, his voice quieter now, but no less insistent. "Tell me the truth," he said. "Is she mine?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had always known this moment would come, that one day she would have to face the consequences of her decision. She had told herself for years that she had done the right thing, that keeping her distance had been the only way to protect both of them from a life that wouldn't have fit. But standing here now, seeing the look in Henry's eyes, she wasn't so sure anymore. She stood up slowly, keeping one hand on Sophia's shoulder as she met Henry's gaze. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's yours." The room fell into complete silence. Henry didn't move, didn't speak. For the first time in his life, he looked completely unprepared. The color drained slightly from his face, his fingers tightening against the edge of his desk as if grounding himself. "How?" he finally asked, but the word felt almost meaningless. Emily swallowed hard. "I found out after I left. I wanted to tell you, I did, but you were building your company, you were everywhere, always in the press, making deals. You had your whole future ahead of you, and I didn't think you'd want this." Henry's expression darkened, something raw flashing through his eyes. "You didn't think I'd want my own child?" His voice was controlled, but there was something beneath it, something that made Emily's stomach twist with guilt. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she admitted, looking away. "I didn't want to hold you back." Henry let out a quiet, humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Holding me back? Emily, do you have any idea what you took from me?" His voice wasn't loud, but the weight of his words landed like a punch. "You made that choice for me. You decided I wouldn't want to be a father. You never even gave me the chance." Emily flinched, gripping Sophia's hand even tighter. She had known he would be angry, but hearing it out loud, seeing the hurt beneath the frustration in his eyes, made it feel so much worse. Sophia shifted slightly, looking up at Henry again. "Are you really my daddy?" she asked, her voice small but filled with quiet hope. Henry inhaled sharply, his gaze locked onto hers. He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the dark curls that matched Emily's, at the bright blue eyes that were identical to his own. His throat worked as he swallowed, and when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Emily expected. I didn't know about you," he admitted, and for the first time, his carefully controlled exterior cracked just a little. Sophia blinked up at him, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "That's okay," she said simply, as if it was the easiest thing in the world. "You know now." Something in Henry's expression shifted again, but before he could say anything else, Emily straightened, her instincts kicking back in. "We should go," she said quickly, pulling Sophia closer. "I shouldn't have brought her here. She stopped herself, shaking her head. This was a mistake." Henry's eyes snapped back to hers, his expression hardening again. "The hell it was." He took a step forward, his voice firm now, decisive. "You don't just drop something like this on me and walk away, Emily. That's not how this works." Emily's heart pounded. She had spent years keeping her life separate from his, convincing herself that she had done what was best for everyone. But now, in just a few minutes, everything had unraveled. There was no walking away from this. Not anymore. Emily stood frozen, gripping Sophia's hand as Henry's piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. She could feel her pulse hammering in her ears, the weight of his words pressing down on her. He wasn't going to let this go. And deep down, she had always known he wouldn't. Henry took another step forward, his presence filling the room with an intensity that made it impossible to breathe. "You don't get to just walk away from this," he said, his voice controlled but edged with something raw. "Not this time." Emily knew he was right. She had made that choice once before, leaving, disappearing from his life without a trace, convincing herself that it was for the best. But now, standing here with their daughter between them, she couldn't run anymore. She exhaled shakily, lowering herself to Sophia's level. "Sweetheart," she said gently, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's face, "why don't you wait in the hallway for a minute? I need to talk to Mr. Bennet." Sophia frowned but nodded, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "Okay, Mommy." She turned back to Henry, tilting her head slightly. "Will I see you again?" Henry's entire body tensed, as if the question had struck something deep inside him. He crouched down, leveling his gaze with hers, and for the first time, the steel in his expression softened. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "You will." Satisfied with his answer, Sophia gave him a small smile before walking toward the door. Emily waited until she was out of earshot before turning back to Henry, forcing herself to stand tall even though she felt anything but strong. He crossed his arms, watching her carefully. "Start talking," he said. Emily swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't do this to hurt you." Henry let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "That's funny because it sure as hell feels like it." She closed her eyes for a brief second, forcing herself to stay calm. "I was scared, Henry. When I found out I was pregnant, you were at the peak of your career. You were working 18-hour days, making billion-dollar deals, flying across the world. Your company was your entire life." Henry's jaw tightened. "And you thought that meant I wouldn't want my child?" "I thought you wouldn't have time for her," Emily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I told you, you'd feel trapped. I didn't want to force you into something you weren't ready for." His eyes darkened, his hands clenching at his sides. "That wasn't your decision to make." "I know," she whispered. "But by the time I realized that, it was too late. I had already left. Too much time had passed. I didn't know how to come back." Henry ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "You should have told me," he said, his voice lower now, filled with something that sounded almost like exhaustion. "You should have given me a choice." Emily looked away, guilt washing over her. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Henry shook his head, his expression unreadable. "And now? What are you thinking now?" Emily hesitated. "Now, I know I made a mistake." Silence filled the room. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, feel the years of pain and loss that hung between them like an invisible wall. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice quieter but firm. "I want to be in her life." Emily's breath caught. She had expected anger, had expected accusations and resentment. But this was something else. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw past the powerful CEO, past the controlled businessman. She saw the man who had just found out he had missed 5 years of his daughter's life. The man who was trying to process the impossible and still standing his ground. She nodded slowly. "Okay." Henry's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Okay." Emily swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Yes. You have every right to know her. And she has every right to know you." For the first time since this conversation started, some of the tension in Henry's shoulders eased. But there was still something guarded in his expression, something that told her this wasn't over. "This isn't just about knowing her, Emily," he said, his voice firm again. "I'm not some visitor in her life. I want to be her father." Emily's stomach twisted. She had spent years protecting Sophia, building a life where she could provide for her daughter alone. The idea of letting Henry into that world, of surrendering even a fraction of that control, terrified her. But looking at him now, she realized that she didn't have a choice. "She's all I have, Henry," she whispered. "I don't know how to do this." Henry stepped closer, his gaze intense. "Then let's figure it out." Emily exhaled, nodding slowly. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't standing alone. Emily sat in a small cafe across from the office building, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Across from her, Henry sat with his hands clasped together, his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. The conversation they had started in his office was far from over. She had agreed to let him be part of Sophia's life, but the truth was, she had no idea what that meant. She had spent the last 5 years raising their daughter alone, making every decision by herself. Letting someone else, step into that world felt overwhelming, even if he had every right to be there. Henry's voice was steady, but she could hear the frustration just beneath the surface. "I need to know everything, Emily. I've already missed 5 years. I don't want to miss another second." She let out a slow breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "She's smart," she said softly, looking down at her cup. "She loves books. She always wants to know how things work. And she's stubborn." A small smile ghosted across her lips. "That part is definitely from you." Henry exhaled, his expression shifting. "I want to know more than that," he said. "What was her first word? When did she take her first steps? What does she do when she's scared?" Emily swallowed hard. "Her first word was up," she said quietly. "She hated being in her crib, so she'd reach for me and say up over and over until I picked her up." She glanced at Henry, seeing the way his jaw tensed, the way his hands curled slightly on the table. He was thinking about everything he had missed. "She took her first steps at 13 months, she continued. "She fell a lot at first, but she never cried. She just kept trying until she got it right." Henry nodded, absorbing every word like a man trying to memorize something sacred. "And when she's scared?" Emily hesitated. "She doesn't cry much. But when she's really scared, she hides. Under blankets, behind chairs, anywhere small enough to make her feel safe." Henry leaned back slightly, exhaling. "I don't want her to feel like she has to hide from me." Emily's heart clenched. "She won't," she said. "But she needs time. This is all new for her. For both of you." Henry studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I want shared custody." Her breath caught. She had known this was coming, had known that Henry wouldn't settle for being an occasional visitor in Sophia's life. But hearing the words out loud sent a wave of fear through her. "You want to take her from me?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Henry's expression darkened. "I never said that," he said firmly. "But I'm not going to be some distant father who sees her every other weekend. I want to be involved, Emily. I want to take her to school, read her bedtime stories, be there for her when she needs me." Emily looked away, trying to steady her breathing. "I've raised her alone for 5 years. You can't just walk in and change everything overnight." Henry's voice softened slightly. "I know. And I don't expect you to just hand her over to me. But I need to be a part of her life. You said you wanted to do this the right way, so let's figure out what that means. Together." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. She had spent years believing she was doing the right thing by keeping Henry out of their lives. But sitting here now, watching the way he fought for their daughter, she realized she had been wrong. She looked at him again. "What do you propose?" Henry's lips pressed into a firm line, but there was something determined in his expression. "We start small. You let me spend time with her. We ease her into this. And eventually, we make a plan that works for all of us." Emily hesitated but then nodded. Okay, she said. We'll try. Henry's shoulders relaxed just slightly, but his gaze remained steady. Thank you. Emily let out a slow breath, knowing that nothing about this would be easy. But for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't carrying this weight alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. Emily stood outside the small park, gripping Sophia's hand as they waited for Henry to arrive. The evening air was crisp, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the laughter of children playing on the swings and slides. Sophia was bouncing on her heels, her excitement evident as she clutched her stuffed bear against her chest. "Mommy, do you think he'll like me?" she asked, tilting her head up to look at Emily with wide blue eyes. Emily felt her heart squeeze. She crouched down, brushing a stray curl from Sophia's forehead. "Sweetheart, of course, he'll like you," she said softly. "He already does." Sophia bit her lip, nodding, but Emily could see the small flicker of uncertainty in her daughter's expression. As much as Sophia was curious about Henry, she was also nervous. And Emily couldn't blame her. This was all happening so fast. A black luxury car pulled up near the entrance of the park, and Emily straightened, her pulse quickening as Henry stepped out. He was dressed more casually than usual, dark jeans and a fitted navy sweater instead of his usual suit. He looked different like this, less like the powerful CEO she had once known and more like a man trying to figure out his place in something new. Henry's eyes immediately found Sophia, and for a moment, he just stood there, taking her in. Then, with careful steps, he approached. "Hi, Sophia," he said, his voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. Sophia hesitated for only a second before offering a small smile. "Hi." There was a moment of silence, a delicate tension hanging in the air, and then Henry crouched down, meeting Sophia at her level. "Your mom told me you like books," he said, pulling something from his jacket pocket. "I thought you might like this." He held out a small, hardcover book, its cover decorated with colorful illustrations of animals and fairy tale characters. Sophia's eyes lit up. She reached out, taking it carefully, her fingers running over the cover. "I love books," she said, a hint of excitement in her voice. Henry smiled, relief flickering across his face. "Then maybe you can tell me which ones are your favorite sometime." Sophia nodded, flipping through the pages as if testing the feel of them in her hands. She looked up at him again, studying him with the quiet curiosity that Emily knew so well. "Are you really my daddy?" Emily held her breath. She knew this question was coming, but hearing it out loud made her stomach twist. Henry's expression softened, and he nodded. "Yes, I am." Sophia tilted her head slightly. "How come I didn't meet you before?" Henry exhaled slowly, glancing at Emily before looking back at his daughter. "Because I didn't know about you," he admitted. "But I do now. And I don't want to miss anything else." Sophia seemed to consider this for a long moment. Then, with the simple trust that only a child could have, she reached out and took his hand. "Okay." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat as Henry blinked, clearly caught off guard by the small gesture. He looked at their joined hands as if trying to memorize the moment, as if trying to process the fact that, in the span of a few seconds, his daughter had accepted him. Henry stood up, his hand still holding Sophia's. He looked at Emily then, something unspoken passing between them. They had a long way to go, and nothing about this would be easy. But in that moment, standing in the soft glow of the setting sun, watching Henry and Sophia together, Emily knew they had taken the first real step forward. "Do you want to go play?" Henry asked Sophia, nodding toward the playground. Sophia grinned and nodded eagerly. "Yes." Henry let out a small laugh, and together, they walked toward the swings, Sophia still holding his hand. Emily stayed behind for a moment, watching them, feeling something she hadn't expected, hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out. Together. Emily watched as Sophia ran toward the swings, still holding onto Henry's hand. It was a sight she never expected to see, and yet here they were, her daughter laughing as Henry helped her climb onto the seat, his hand steadying her as if he had been doing this for years. But he hadn't. He had missed everything, her first steps, her first words, the scraped knees and the bedtime stories. And now he was trying to catch up, trying to step into a role he had never prepared for. She sat on a nearby bench, giving them space but unable to take her eyes off them. Henry pushed Sophia gently, his movements careful, as if he was afraid to let go too soon. Sophia giggled, tilting her head back as the wind rushed past her face. The sound of it made something tighten in Emily's chest. Henry glanced over at her, and their eyes met for a brief second before he turned his attention back to Sophia. He was different like this, less guarded, less composed. There was something raw in the way he watched his daughter, something almost vulnerable. After a few minutes, Sophia slowed the swing, dragging her feet against the ground before hopping off and running back toward Emily. She climbed onto the bench beside her mother, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. "Mommy, can we do this again tomorrow?" she asked, looking up with hopeful eyes. Emily hesitated, feeling Henry's gaze on her, waiting for her answer. She knew how much this moment meant to both of them. She also knew that once she let Henry in, there would be no way to take it back. She brushed a curl behind Sophia's ear and smiled. "We'll see, sweetheart." Sophia beamed, turning back to Henry. "Did you see how high I went?" Henry smiled, nodding. "I did. You're really good at it." Sophia grinned, clearly pleased with herself. "Next time, I want to go even higher." Emily felt the weight of Henry's eyes on her again, and when she looked at him, she saw something that made her heart clench, relief. He wasn't just trying to be in Sophia's life, he was trying to prove that he was staying, that he was serious about being a father. And she realized, in that moment, that she wanted to believe him. They walked back toward the parking lot together, Sophia chattering excitedly about the playground and the other kids she had met. Henry walked beside them, listening, nodding, asking questions. It felt almost natural, almost normal, as if they had done this before. When they reached Emily's car, Sophia hesitated, then turned to Henry. "Are you coming home with us?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent expectation. Emily's breath caught, but Henry crouched down beside Sophia, his expression gentle. "Not tonight, kiddo," he said. "But I'll see you again really soon." Sophia seemed to think about this for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." Henry stood up, turning to Emily, his voice quieter now. "Can we talk for a minute?" She glanced at Sophia, who was already climbing into the back seat, then nodded, stepping away from the car with him. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "I don't want to miss anything else." Emily crossed her arms, feeling the cool night air settle around them. "I know." He studied her for a moment. "Are you okay with this?" She let out a slow breath, looking back at Sophia through the car window. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think she is. And that's what matters." Henry nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then we'll take it one step at a time." She met his gaze, searching for something, reassurance, certainty, maybe even hope. And for the first time, she thought she saw it. "Okay," she said softly. Henry took a step back, giving her space, but there was something in his expression that told her he wasn't letting go. "Good night, Emily." "Good night, Henry." As she got into the car and started the engine, Sophia yawned, leaning against the seat with a sleepy smile. "I like him," she murmured, her voice soft. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as Henry stood by his car, watching them drive away. "Yeah," she whispered. "Me too." Emily hadn't realized how much her life could change in such a short amount of time. Just days ago, she had been living in the routine she had built for herself and Sophia, a life that was simple but stable, one where she made all the decisions and carried all the responsibilities alone. Now, everything felt different. There was another presence in their world, someone she had spent years trying to forget but who now seemed impossible to ignore. Henry had kept his word. He hadn't just shown up for Sophia once, he had shown up every single day since their meeting at the park. Sometimes he would take her out for ice cream, sometimes they would go to the bookstore, and sometimes he would simply sit with her at the playground and listen to her talk about everything and anything. Emily had expected him to struggle, to falter in the role of a father he had never played before, but instead, he had settled into it with a quiet determination that she hadn't anticipated. One evening, Emily found herself watching them from the window as Henry and Sophia sat on the living room floor, building a tower out of blocks. Sophia was giggling as Henry dramatically pretended to measure each piece, acting as if it were the most important construction project in the world. The sight of it made something twist deep in Emily's chest. It was a version of Henry she had never seen before, one that was softer, less composed, one that cared about nothing in that moment except making his daughter laugh. She hadn't realized she was smiling until Henry looked up and caught her staring. His lips curled slightly as he met her gaze, and she quickly turned away, feeling a warmth rise in her cheeks. She busied herself in the kitchen, telling herself she was just giving them space, but in truth, she needed a moment to process the weight of everything. When Sophia finally went to bed, exhausted from a long day of playing, Henry lingered for a moment at the door, hesitant as if he wasn't sure if he should say something. Emily stood by the counter, arms crossed, still feeling the effects of the moment they had shared earlier. "She's amazing," Henry finally said, his voice quiet but certain. Emily smiled, nodding. "Yeah, she is." Henry hesitated before stepping a little closer. "I don't know if I ever told you this," he said. "But I would have been there. If I had known." Emily swallowed, her heart tightening at the sincerity in his voice. "I know that now," she admitted. Henry studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then let me keep proving it." Emily looked up at him, meeting his gaze fully. There was no anger left between them, no resentment, just a shared understanding that they had lost time they could never get back. But maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to build something new. She exhaled slowly before answering. "Okay." A small smile touched Henry's lips before he turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Things weren't perfect. They had a long way to go. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't carrying everything alone. And that was enough. The ending of this story isn't just about reconciliation, it's about growth, forgiveness, and the realization that love, whether romantic or parental, isn't about perfection, but persistence. Emily and Henry lost years they could never get back, but instead of drowning in regret, they chose to move forward, step by step, for the sake of their daughter. What makes this ending satisfying isn't just that Henry becomes part of Sophia's life, but that he earns that place. He doesn't demand immediate trust or act entitled to fatherhood, he proves himself through actions, not just words. And Emily, who spent so long believing she had to do everything alone, finally learns that letting someone in doesn't mean losing control, it means gaining support. The beauty of this conclusion is in its realism. There's no instant, picture-perfect family, no sudden romantic reunion forced by circumstance. Instead, there's a quiet but powerful understanding that healing takes time and that family is built through effort, not just blood. It leaves the reader with hope, not just for Emily and Henry, but for anyone who has ever wondered if second chances are worth taking.